All right, so welcome everyone to our webinar, Building Brand You, Standing Out from the Crowd. So I'm Mackenzie Lalka, and I serve AKPsi as the Associate Director of Education. I'll be moderating the webcast today. Before we dive into the content, just a few housekeeping rules. We are going to ask all participants to keep themselves muted during the presentation so we can't hear the presenter. But if you'd like to turn your video camera on so the presenter and other attendees can see you, that is up to you. We do have the chat feature available, so when you are interacting, posting comments, it's going to go ahead and show your name, but consider also mentioning your chapter or university as well. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have a brief Q&A, and you can submit your questions via the chat feature, or at that point, if you'd like to ask your question verbally, you can use the raise hand feature, and we'll unmute you to ask your question that way. So for our program today, we have Alexander Sultan, and I will go ahead and hand it over to him.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. My name is Alexander Sultan. I'm an alumni from San Diego State University, otherwise known as Mu Sigma. This presentation is a shortened version of my normal presentation I usually do for about an hour. So I've kind of condensed this down to make it digestible and also have it interactive so that way we can have some Q&A at the end if you'd like. I call this Standing Out from the crowd the pandemic version because right now we're stuck at home and this is all virtual. So. Well, one, thank you for joining us this evening. The second thing is I hope everyone's doing well. I know right now there's a lot of uncertainty and, the news just seems to be continuously like a roller coaster of like, everything's gonna be great and everything's not gonna be so great and then everything's great again. So this presentation is really to kind of like take this time where you might be, not doing what you normally do, or even though your state might be opening, there might be limited amounts of, areas to go and things to do. This is really a time I think that we can all kind of reflect on how we can build our personal brand. So that's what I kind of put it together for. So when I think of your brand, you always hear that statement that's along the lines of like, I think it's an adage that you've heard. It's like, it's not what you know, but who you know. And I would actually challenge that is incorrect. And it really is not about what you know. Well, it is a little bit, but it's not about like what you know or who you know. It's really more about who knows you. And the reason I point that out is because you can be a master of Excel and able to be able to write macros without having to use a mouse. And in fact, for those of you who might want to do investment banking, a lot of the investment banks like Goldman and BlackRock, when they give you an examination, you'll notice they'll give you this Excel spreadsheet, and the first thing you'll notice is like, where's the mouse, right? Now, most people who've gone into this exam, they know that there will be no mouse there, and that you'll have to manipulate Excel through shortcuts. But if you're not prepared for that, then that could be a challenge. So you can be an Excel, so in that example, you can be an Excel wizard who's able to program macros without using a mouse and is able to do all these different amazing things with shortcuts. But if nobody knows that you have that capability or that skill set, it's not necessarily as powerful than if everybody knows that you're sort of the go-to person for those items. So I just want you to think about that. And that's what today is about, is really how do you raise or elevate yourself amongst the crowd so that people know about your skills, and then what are the different ways that you can make yourself stand out from the crowd. So let's look about why you should brand yourself. So there's a couple of reasons why you probably should. And I always tell people, you're a brand and not even aware of it. I know that I have a brand, and and some people, it might be good, it might be bad, but I know that I have things I've done over years, or my personality at work, or however I behave, will create a brand or around me. A good example of this is like, and I guess I'll use brother. So you might have someone in your chapter who is perpetually late, and I don't want to say they're called brothers always late, but they're the person who generally, we all know who they are. And maybe it's you, or maybe it's me, but it's the person who is always about 15 minutes late, right? And over time, someone eventually tells them, hey, it's really disrespectful to be continuously late all the time. You should probably, work on trying to be on time. And so the person does a little bit of internal reflection, says, you know what, maybe that's right. I'm going to try to be on time more often because, being on time is, a better thing to do, and it's going to help, it's going to help my relationships. So the brother then goes ahead and is always on time, and they do it for about a month or two, and then there's that one day where something happens and they end up showing up late again for 15 minutes. And guess what happens? They go back to being brothers always late. So the problem with the brand sometimes is it's hard to shake, and it takes consistent effort. And the reason why you might want to be at least aware of your brand is because if you are a person who has some of those, I wouldn't say negative brand images that kind of get tied to you, you at least want to be aware of them so that you can mitigate or work on figuring them out. Other things to think about are brands are going to essentially help define who you are. And then, as I said before, it says in there like what you're about and why someone should hire you, right? So think about your social media presence, right? If your brand on LinkedIn has you as a very polished person who is like super professional and is always putting their best foot forward and has an amazing resume on LinkedIn, but if you get Googled and they find your Instagram account, or maybe it's public, or they find your Twitter account, or they find your Facebook page, and it shows a slightly less different style of you, what you're about. Like maybe your Instagram is, all about being Insta famous, right? It's pictures of you, in your Maserati, which you don't own, but you post Maseratis, or it's in different environments, like you're out at the club having drinks, and it just puts out a different brand of you, and it becomes what they call brand inconsistent. And I'm not saying, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying don't be yourself. Always be your true self and bring your true self to work. But just be aware that when there's social media out there, you want to make sure that's consistent with what you're trying to put out as your brand. The other thing also about putting forth a good brand for yourself is it's a way of showing great value, right? So if you take pride in, like, let's say it's your LinkedIn or your Instagram, if you're like curated for an area that you want to showcase that you have expertise in, then make sure it's showing what those skills are, and then in turn, that will show sort of the value. And the other reason why you want to consider yourself as a brand is most people don't actively try to manage themselves as brands, and therefore, because the brand is essentially drives what their outfacing persona is going to look like. Employers can then have a different negative view of you. But the good side is if you are driving your brand and you are putting your best foot forward, it will make you stand out not only from other students who are applying for jobs. It'll make you stand out against your classmates from your same school, or even other AKPsi brothers. So those are all reasons why you might want to consider branding yourself. So real quickly, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but understanding yourself as a brand. So there's two different concepts out there. One's a brand on one side, and on the other side you have a commodity. So if we think of brands, let's think of Coca-Cola as a brand, right? So if you think of Coke as a brand, the first thing you might say is, oh, it's a type of soda. It's American. There's nostalgia to it. And then if you think of the commoditizing factors of soda, think about like what it really at the end of the day is, right? It's just soda water. It's carbonated soda water. So if you take that brand and you take the commoditizing factors of it, of being soda water, and you minus them out, what are you left with, right? You're left with things like nostalgia, sharing with a friend. You might think of polar bears. There's a whole bunch of different things that you get out of it. So when you think of it that way, think of yourself as a brand, as you as an individual. Think about everybody around you. It's your classmates, it's people from your school, it's other AKPsi brothers, all those items together. Whatever's left over, whether it adds or subtracts to your perceived or real value, that is going to be your brand equity. And so what I want to talk today about is, well, how do you build your brand equity? So let's talk about building your personal brand. Okay, so there's a couple of quick hit suggestions I can give you. Some of them are around keeping a professional journal. And I know this might sound weird, but trust me, if you write down anything that you do on a day-to-day basis, it could be used later for an interview. So I want you to think about it like on the end of a week, maybe just have like a weekly review for a couple of minutes. I have a notepad on my desk that I keep, that I put down things like, any difficult situations, any challenges, leadership examples. Those are all things that I would suggest you as students would do. I actually keep things similar to that. Like if I had a successful project, or if I got an email from a particular person that said, hey, Alexander, you did a great job, I kind of make notes of all that stuff. And the reason I do that is at my year-end performance evaluation, I'm able to very quickly go back through and look through my little professional journal and pull nuggets out of there of like all the goodness I did over the last year. So the reason why I suggest this is a good idea is it gives you that fast, quick way of finding out like what you've done for the year. Now, from a student perspective, why is this help also valuable? It's valuable because when you go into that job interview and you're asked, like, tell me about a difficult situation you've been in, if you've kind of looked through your curated list, if you will, of all those things that you might have had that might have been difficult situations over a whole year, it becomes really good interview question answers, if that makes sense. So it almost becomes like different scenarios, and you're not scrambling at top, trying to think of something that they might have thrown you, like maybe in a leadership example. Those are all things that you can have. So that will help you when it comes time for your interviews. And I'm not saying you have to sit there and be like, dear diary. In fact, hold on a second. Here we go. Dear diary, today I'm not saying you have to do that, but the fact that you can actually do it on a computer and have like a running tally will allow you to kind of keep notes on a bunch of different things. Like, I talk about keep notes on people you meet, right? So if you run into somebody, and let's say it's, it's somebody introduces you to someone, and it's a good way to tickle your mind and remember, oh, I should send a thank you note to this person, right? So by keeping this information in a journal, it also reminds you, hey, I emailed Alexander on this date. I haven't thanked him, or I haven't contacted him in about like 60 days or 90 days, right? So it's all things that you can use to kind of help, tickle or give you thoughts or ideas in the future. So it's just something to consider. Um, the second item I always like to say, and AKPsi is a great sandbox for this, if you will, is an opportunity to learn to fail and recover. Nowhere else do I know of than a university or even an Alpha Kappa Psi do you have an opportunity to try something, um, fail miserably about it, fail miserably, and then learn from your weaknesses. One of Amazon's principles is fail fast. But the whole concept is fail fast, but learn from those failures, right? Because the faster you learn that something doesn't work, the faster you'll find out that what does work. So those are things to kind of consider. And the last one is to consider is developing your personal brand equity plan. And so I'm about to go into that a little bit deeper, and I'm going to flash up on the screen. And what I think we'll do, Mackenzie, is if you can make a note of, is there a way that you can figure out who's on the call so we can get them a copy of this particular thing? I will happily type this up and email to you. You could just email it to everybody. And I know that this will be available to people, on the screen, but I want to leave it here for a couple seconds. So this is, like, I would say, my top 10 things to do to build your personal brand equity plan. So the first thing I would do is say, what am I currently known for? Like, list 2 or 4 things. Are you known to be that macro Excel guru? Are you known to be a cybersecurity subject matter expert? Are you tech savvy? Are you a photographer? Are you a social media maven, or whatever it's going to be? What are you known for? The 2 or 4 things that people kind of, you think, associate with you. Those are important. And we'll get to a little bit later for why it's also important to kind of take some of these and validate them. I'll talk to that in a little bit later. The question to ask yourself is, by this time next year, I plan to be known for 1 or 2 more things. So right now, what do I want to be known for in a year from now? Maybe for me, it's I want to be known for, the ability, I want to be known that I am a good photographer, or that I can take photography, my photos are pretty, good. So I want to maybe be known for that next year. Ask yourself, if you have a job, or even if you don't, like, what your current situation is, like what my current job challenges me in the following ways. What are 1 to 3 ways that you're currently being challenged at your current work or your internship or school? Because that will help you kind of understand a little bit more about yourself. And then on the flip side, ask yourself, what new challenges would I like to take on in the next year? Like, what are 1 or 2 new things that you want to do? So maybe, for example, you've always thought it'd be really great if I can get involved with nonprofits. Well, guess what? This is the perfect time to say, I would like to take on a challenge to be involved with a nonprofit. Or you might be like, you know what? I want to read more. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm looking around I live in a studio, by the way, just for giggles. So everything's pretty much all around me. I'm like surrounded by everything. But like a book, right? So one of the things I've challenged myself this year is to try to, and I'm not going to do something crazy like read a book a month, because I know I'll never accomplish that. But read more books, right? And I know some of you guys read like a book a day, but Mackenzie, you're special. I don't know how you can do that. But I want to read more books. Like, maybe it's just like 6 books in the year, right? 6 books. And then maybe, 2 of those books are going to be nonfiction, and 4 of them will be fiction, right? 2 business books, 4 nonfiction, 4 fiction books. But the point is, how are you going to challenge yourself to make yourself better by a year from now? I want you to do a little bit of thought about, like, what have you learned in the last 90 days? Like, what new things have you learned in the last 90 days? I learned in the last 90 days that I have forgotten how to cook. Top ramen, while it's delicious, and cup of soup is fantastic, is not, you can't live off of those because they have almost no nutritional content. So for somebody who used to travel all the time and used to always dine out in New York City, it's a little bit more difficult. So I've learned that I need to learn how to cook better. So that was what I learned a while ago. And I think I told people this before. So some of the new skills I want to learn this next year is learn how to cook again, right? Learn how to make something other than mac and cheese, something other than top ramen. So those are some of the skills I'm trying to learn over the next year. Number 7 is, what important new context can you add in the last 90 days? What are the 2 new contexts you add in the last 90 days? 2 or 4 names. And that goes back to my professional diary I talked about before, journal, is that, who are the people you met in the last 90 days? And the reason it's important is, how are you going to continue to connect with them over the next 6 months to year, right? I've often told people, when you build a network, the key about a network is it's like a plant. If you don't nurture, water, and take care of your plan, over time it'll start to fade. And it's somewhat in some ways like your network. If it's very hard to just reach out to somebody who you met like a couple times and be like, hey, I haven't talked to you in 10 years, want to have a chat with you, and by the way, can you get me a job, right? Probably not going to work. But if you've been having a conversation with that person for a while and you come back and you say, hey, I'm actually looking for new opportunities, you're more likely to have someone to help you. So keep that in mind in your context, is to continuously think about how you're working with the people that you've met in the last 2 to 90 days, and ask yourself, have I talked to them in those last 90 days? And you haven't, you might want to drop a little email. Number 8, my public visibility consists of one or two things. So like if someone was to Google you on Instagram, look at your Twitter, look at your Facebook, what are they going to see, and what do you think they're going to perceive you to be? And ask yourself that question. And then ask yourself, like, what is the one main resume enhancing activity that I'm going to do over the next 90 days? What is that going to be? Is it going to be, I'm going to learn a new skill. Maybe I want to learn how to program in Ruby on Rails, or maybe I want to understand a new language, just to be conversational. Whatever it's going to be, what are you going to be your main resume enhancing activity? And then last but not least, number 10 is, my resume is materially different from last year in the following one or two ways. So if you pick up your resume from last year and you look at your resume from this year and they're exactly the same, this is a perfect opportunity to say, oh, what can I do to make my resume different, right? It's been a year. Hopefully you've gotten some new experiences, but like, how is it different? And do that analysis. So I do want to pause here for a sec and just open up for any questions before I move on to the last slide or two. Does anyone have any questions on these 10 brand equity plan items? I think Mackenzie said you can raise your hand or you can type in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer any questions before I move along. Okay, so everyone was just amazed and they all got this and there's like no questions at all. Either that or everyone's multitasking like I do on Zoom calls. It's like you got the Zoom in the background, I've got the CNN over there, and I'm cooking dinner. Top ramen, typically. I'm joking. I don't have time for top ramen. I use a cup of soup because it comes in a little cup and you just put the hot water on it. Okay. Okay, so
it looks like we have one question come in.
Yep,
so how do you keep a relationship kind of through follow-up emails?
That's a great question. So I've actually been going through this myself right now. So I have a client of mine who used to work at Google, who now is at Disney, and I work for Deloitte. I don't know if I mentioned that before. I work for Deloitte. I'm a senior manager in our cyber risk practice, and he was a client when I was at KPMG. He was a client of mine at Google, and now he's moved on to a new role over at Disney. So I sent him a little email. I tried texting him because I had his phone number, and apparently I didn't discover his phone number. He like turned it into like a Google Voice number, so he didn't get it for like a month. So I thought he was actually blowing me off. But then he finally got it, and he came back and he said, hey, I just saw this message. I'm really sorry I haven't responded back to you. But yeah, I moved on to Disney, and the best way to connect with me is sending me an email here, and gave me a new email address. So it was just kind of a reaching out to congratulate him on his new role. So if you noticed on LinkedIn that somebody's gotten a new role and part of your network, then that's a great way to kind of like celebrate a milestone with them. I wouldn't post it on their like their little thumbs up with like a little comment in there. I would just send them an email, right? The other thing also is, let's say you have a relationship and you want to just kind of touch base with them. With the pandemic, I think we're all given a little bit of grace. It's a perfect time to reach out to somebody, not your exes, because apparently that's what's going on right now is everyone's reaching out to their exes. So don't do that. That's bad. But reach out to people in your network and just be like, hey, I hope all is well with you. I was just thinking about you the other day, and I'm wondering how you're doing. I get a lot of those emails. It's like people send me emails like, hey, Alexander, are you in New York City? I'm like, I'm in New York. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So, and that starts up a conversation, right? So it's just a simple email. It doesn't have to be long. My recommendation is not to send one of those huge emails that's like 6 or 7 paragraphs. It could be pithy, 1 or 2 paragraphs. I was thinking about you. Hope you're doing great. How are things? And with a question, always have a question in there somewhere. Otherwise, if it's just like I was thinking about you, hope all's well, and that's it, no one's going to reply, right? So there always has to be an action in there. But that's one way, Kenny, that you can actually, and Eric, you can go ahead and kind of keep that relationship going with a follow-up email. Always ask questions. Don't ask a bajillion questions. I tend to do that. I'll write you an email and you'll have like 35 questions in the email. And that's not always the best way to communicate, but if you're going to just reach out for a follow-up, just send a little email. Another thing that you can do if you want to like try to be helpful is, let's say, for example, there's something that somebody likes. So for example, I have a couple friends who are huge fanatics about baking. So if I find a really cool recipe, I might, if I tried it out, like baked something, I might email the recipe to my friends and be like, hey, saw this really cool recipe, just want to pass it along to you. If you find an article on the internet that you think someone might be interested in, forward the article. Those are all different ways that you can kind of create those touch points and kind of keep yourself top of mind for some of your network. Okay, let's see. I think, okay, good. So that was it. So my last two, awesome. Thank you guys. So my last two areas I just want to touch on briefly before we wrap up is the justification. So the question I said before is you had all that stuff before about your brand equity plan. Well, ask yourself, are you worth it? And there's a couple of reasons why you want to do it. And you kind of want to be able to list off like, why are all the reasons why you're worth it? And I say make it a genuine question and an open question. I often say that we need to have board of directors, right? Like we're a company. Think of yourself as a company. It's you incorporated, right? And you should have a board of directors who can give you good feedback, like any company would. And my encouragement is not to have on your board of directors your parents or your best friend. Because if you're asking your mom or your dad, like, hey, what do you think about me? I'm 95% positive, unless your parents are like my parents. They'll be like, you're doing an awesome job. Keep it up. You've got this, right? That's extremely unhelpful. What you want is you want people to tell you, well, to be honest, here's some things I think, that I've noticed about you that drive me nuts, right? Or, help you with maybe some brand inconsistencies, right? It's like, oh, you're super friendly and helpful, but whenever I ask for help, you never give it to me. So those are all things you kind of want that feedback. So ask the question and find out, what is the value you're offering, and ask your friends, and not your best friends, but some of your folks who could even be mentors. In fact, I would encourage you to have your board of directors be people who you want to mentor you to give you some of that advice. And then what can you offer? Like, what are you personally able to offer to, I don't want to say the world, but to an employer, right? Um, and then think about what those keywords they might be looking for, or those different performance skills they might be looking for, because those will all be things that will show up in a job description. And that was when I think the last one was, what are some of your key skills? Those are all things that should come out in like LinkedIn, for example, or in a resume. And then the last bit I want to kind of touch on before I'll go to questions is identify areas for development. So no one's perfect. I am by far nowhere near being perfect. Most of my friends can tell you that. I have got, I got warts like everybody else does, right? No one's perfect. So one of the things I've been doing recently through work is, what are the ways that I can improve myself, right? So where do I lack experience? Or, ask yourself that question. I've asked myself that question, and I've found that there's a couple areas that I'm not skilled in as well as I could be. And some of them are more tech areas. Like I know Azure and I know Google Cloud, and I do a lot of cloud work, but I'm not super knowledgeable about AWS, right? I've never had an experience with that. So now I'm starting to get involved with some of our works, different cloud solutions and trainings to skill up, if you will, to kind of level up my own skills in AWS. Where do you have weaknesses? So for example, if you discover that you might have a weakness, and my weakness, and I'll just turn this off for a hot sec. I'm gonna turn my video off. So my weakness is, let's see. So if you see this crazy little photo, it's something that Deloitte calls business chemistry. And so the red on the right-hand side is what they call driver, and the yellow on the left-hand side is what they call pioneer. And the bottom in green is called integrator, and blue is guardian. So if you look at the green, you'll see it's very tiny. So the problem for me is my integrator is very small. People who have very small integrators gives exactly this many Fs, if you will. They give this many Fs. So that's 0. So the problem is that I lack empathy sometimes, and I know this. So I have to try a little bit extra hard. And one of my weaknesses is that when I meet with my team as a driver, I want to go through the agenda, get stuff done, and just get finished with it. And my team might want to have a conversation, especially right now with COVID-19. My team wants to spend 5 minutes of a meeting to have that conversation about how everyone's doing. And me naturally wouldn't even think of that. It wouldn't even be like, I wouldn't even start off with a hope everyone's doing well. It's more of like, okay, guys, agenda items number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Everyone go execute your work. Bye-bye. And you can kind of imagine that's not great. So that's a weakness I have, and the things I've done and started planning on how do I do it. So I actually look at things. I've worked in a couple different areas on trying to make sure I'm more empathetic. It doesn't come to me naturally because Mackenzie can tell you I'm not exactly warm and fuzzy and cuddly when you meet me in person. I'm just kind of like This is my happy face, my sad face, my mad face, and my excited face. I'm pretty much non-emotional. I'm kind of like devoid of emotions. Which you can imagine if you're looking for somebody with empathy. That's if you're telling somebody a sob story and this is my face the entire time you're talking to me. It's not great. So what can you do if you have weaknesses, right? So I can't do this, for example, internships, volunteering, or training, but those are some things that you can look at doing, is either volunteering, training, an internship, or in my case, just practicing being a little bit more empathetic or more concerned about how people feel. So those are all different ways that you can improve your weaknesses or find ways to improve your weaknesses. And then lastly, the last thing is don't wait to identify these areas. That's the reason I said you want that board of directors to kind of give you some insight and maybe things that you might be weak in. Let them kind of give you some guidance saying, hey, there's a couple areas I think you do a really good job, but these are two things I've noticed that I think you might want to work on improving on. And take it with a grain of salt. Maybe you don't agree with them, but at least listen to what they're going to say. And then the reason why it's helpful is then you can start the process early and continuously increase and improve upon whatever that weakness might be. I like to look at things as always as lifetime learning. I still take classes online on different topics. There's things like LinkedIn Learning. There's my company pays for something called Udemy. There's Cloud. There's another one called Cloud Academy. Those are all different online learnings. There's Khan Academy. There's Open University. There's tons of free online learning. So if don't think that just because you have a weakness that there's no way to get trained or skilled up on it. There's probably a way to do it, and it's probably low cost or no cost. I mean, worst case scenario is you go to community college. I know that sounds crazy. We're all in college, but community colleges are an inexpensive way to skill up in different topics that you might want to, like photography, for example, or even cooking. So those are sort of the things I wanted to cover. I think I'm done, and so what I'd like to do is just turn it back over. I think it's going to go to end of slideshow. Stop sharing. I'm going to turn it back over and just see if there's any questions that anyone has, and I'll be happy to answer questions for the next, how many more minutes do we have? I've lost my track. 3 minutes. I can stay a little bit longer, Mackenzie, if we need to, like 10 minutes. I have no problems.
Perfect. So as I said earlier, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the group chat, or if you want to ask it verbally, you can go ahead and raise your hand. We'll go ahead and kick it off with the first question here. So you talked about how to just build your brand to begin with. What happens if, say, you are that brother always late, or you have some sort of bad personal brand that you want to change? What are some things that you can do to kind of help change what your brand is?
So I disappeared as Alex and became Alexander. No, I'm just joking. So friends who knew me used to know that when I was in college, I used to go by Alex. Although I didn't like it, I just kind of let everyone call me Alex, and my preference is Alexander. So how do you change that image? Well, as I said before, it's not easy, right? So there's a couple things you can do. So for example, for me, two of my team members know that I am working on empathy. And so what I've done is I've said, hey, do me a favor. If at any point you feel that I am not being empathetic and that I'm not displaying empathy, let me know. I mean, don't call me out in front of the whole team, but just, send me an IM and say, hey, Alexander, you might want to change your tone in that, or, hey, can we reevaluate that? So I have people who kind of give me like gut checks or kind of give me some advice, and that's how I continuously improve on it. So that's one way of making the change. The second way of making the change is, unfortunately, sometimes you just got to do it over and over again, and it becomes like muscle memory. So it's like, riding a bicycle. I haven't ridden a bicycle in probably like 5 years, but I'm pretty confident that if I get back into a bike, I'll be able to ride it. When I moved to San Francisco, I sold my car and moved to San Francisco, and so I wasn't technically driving in San Francisco, but again, it's muscle memory, right? I get behind the wheel, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know how to do this thing. It's called driving, and I know how to stay underneath the speed limit, right? So those are things that through practice you'll actually get better at. So hopefully that answered the question. I would normally smile at this point, but I'm not emotional, so this is about you'll get a smirk is what you'll get from me.
All right, so next question we have is, do you have any advice on how to start a relationship with professionals, especially kind of during these difficult times?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to actually go ahead and share again. Let me just turn my screen. I did this for I do this every once in a while. Let me just get all this stuff out of here. Sorry. Give me 1 second. Let's see if I can get this up. It should take a second. There we go. Popping it over here. I'm talking to myself. I'm not crazy. Okay, there we go. Boom. Okay, so hopefully you can see it. I've got my LinkedIn up and running on my right-hand side. Does everyone see the LinkedIn? Actually, it's not my right-hand side. It's your whatever. So it's on the screen. So there's LinkedIn running. So let's say, for example, you don't know anybody, right? And you don't know anybody, but you want to get to know them. So I've shown this kind of trick before. So in the chat box, let me see if I can pull my chat box up. Somebody call out a company that you know nobody at. And please pick a Fortune 500. Stop picking, people are like, oh, I know this company. It's called like, and it's like somebody I've never heard of. It's like Joe Bob's Pizza Shop. So pick a company that's a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 even be better. Feel free, type in the inbox. First one to do it wins. There's a little chat box there. It says to everyone. This is my typing on my computer, hand gestures. My keyboard's actually way down here, but I like to type up here. Nobody's going to type a company. Is everyone? Fiserv. Fiserv, great one. Okay, Fiserv. I actually know somebody at Fiserv, but this will be a good example. So Fiserv. So what you can do in excuse me, in LinkedIn. In LinkedIn, you can basically do a search by a company. Now, this may not work for me, and I'll be honest, I do a lot of searching, so this could possibly not work. But here's an example. So let's say, for example, Gloria. So Gloria Tan, who, by the way, looking at who she knows, Nicole, Miguel, I'm going to take a wild guess and tell you she is a San Diego State Mu Sigma alumni because of the people she knows, and let's see if she is. And she is a SDSU alumni from my home chapter. Awesome. Okay. So so she works at Fiserv. So this is not a good example. So what I'll do instead is I'm going to go back out, and with Fiserv, I'm going to change the first and make it second. And what second is basically my connections first connection. So if we were connected on LinkedIn and you asked me to look up Fiserv, Gloria Tan would show up. And so let's see here. Okay, so here's a bunch of people. So Todd Zivik, he knows Hassan Galib, Don Farino, and 12 other connections. Hassan and Don both worked with me at KPMG. I'm going to take a wild guess and say maybe Todd at one point was a KPMG colleague of mine that I just didn't know very well. And that's probably incorrect. He's probably not. He's probably something else. Nope. KPMG, Federal Advisory Services. He was from my home office about the same time I was there. Ironic and embarrassing. Anyways, but I can get in touch with Todd through Hassan or Don, who I have good relationships with. These are former employees, as well as probably the other 12 people. Laura Salka, yeah, Bill, Craig Faruda. These are all, I should have, if I looked, I would have realized he was a Fed practice KPMG person. But that's an example. So for example, if I want to reach out to Todd, I could go through somebody else to get to him. Does that make sense? So what you guys can do is if you want to go build a relationship or start a relationship with a professional, the best way to do it is have someone like me or somebody who is a catalyst for you to do that introduction. Does that make sense? So let's say, for example, in the case of Amy, if you really wanted to talk to somebody at Fiserv, I would happily send a message to Gloria and be like, hey, Gloria, hope all is well with you. Do you have a couple of minutes? I'd like to introduce you to an alumni. I'd probably start off a little bit slower than that. I wouldn't be like, hey, let me give you a person to talk to. I'd probably start off with, hey, how you doing? Because remember, my driver side is get stuff done. I'd have to do a little bit more empathy. I'd have to slow roll it and maybe take a couple of days to get to kind of re-warm up my relationship with Gloria. Luckily for me, she's a former alum of my chapter, so it might not be that hard. But the point is that once I get that relationship warmed back up, I could say, hey, I'd like to introduce you to Amy, who I don't know Amy's last name, but she's a brother from this chapter over here. Would you be willing to have like maybe a 10-minute conversation with her about whatever? And I've done this for a couple of people. So, and I know that it won't always work, but that's one way to kind of build relationships with professionals is have somebody introduce you to that person. If you were to email Gloria by yourself, it's a chance that she might be like, I don't know who you are. I don't, even though you said, hey, I'm AKPsi, I want to talk to you, it's easier if someone does that introduction. So it facilitates that conversation for you. So I hope that was helpful, but that's one way to do it is you look to see who your second in a company is, and then you look to see what's my link. And as you can see here, it says, I'm a power searcher. I've done too many searches. So now LinkedIn, it says I can't do any more searches now for the rest of the month. Unless I buy the premium business thing, which I'm not going to buy. But you can usually do it for free, and you can do a search for seconds. So hopefully that was helpful. Let's see. Okay, coming from a non-target school, what are some ways for a student like myself and many others to effectively stand up? Same thing. So it's the same thing. You want a champion for you from a non-target school. So let's say you want to work at Deloitte, and Deloitte's not recruiting your campus. I actually have done this research, and I also worked at KPMG. I did the same research at KPMG. It is harder when you're not part of our target market. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. So normally what happens is on internships at target companies, internships, the way it works is we have like, we go to like maybe like 75 schools out of the US, and we do all our internships from there. And then those internships matriculate into full-time offers. And then what ends up happening is there's maybe some billets, there's some spots left over. Maybe there's like 30 or 40 spots left over. And then they'll go back out to campus and they'll recruit for those full-time positions. Not internships, but they'll recruit for full-time positions. But then they also have other ways of coming through. There might be a specific recruiter for an office. So for example, you want to work in the New York office of Deloitte. Then you'd come to me and say, hey, Alexander, I want to work in the New York office at Deloitte. Can you put me in touch with a recruiter who looks at, let's say, like I know the cyber services recruiter for New York. I would put you in touch with her. Again, it would be difficult because if we have no slots available, it'll be harder, but it's not impossible. And the way to do that is to, one, get them a champion from a company that you want to work on, whether it's me for Deloitte or somebody for Deloitte, for another company, and talk to them about maybe helping them put you in touch with their campus recruiter, who might be just a generalist recruiter for that office or for that particular area. So hopefully that helps. But again, it's really having somebody help you. Now, if they come on your campus, then absolutely talk to the campus recruiters on your campus. You don't need to initially use us to help you get there. But if they don't come to your campus and you want to talk to somebody from a company, that's one way. That's one way to kind of put yourself there, and then have someone introduce you. I mean, think about it this way: if you were to think about Rush, right, and recruitment, if you have recruitment and you had somebody bring a friend with them, right? If you went with friends or someone referred you, you'd probably be a little bit less scared of showing up to a recruitment event. At the same token, if you're a student member and somebody brings, like a brother brings one of their friends and they say that this person's really good, we should consider them, it's going to have a little bit more weight than some random person who maybe shows up off the street, right? You kind of have like I wouldn't say a vouch, but you have somebody who's kind of like putting their integrity on the line for somebody, which employee referral programs are the same thing, right? So I can absolutely drop everybody and their mom into employee referral program. But if I start getting really bad people hired, like let's say they're not great, and I'm not saying they're AKPsi, but let's just say they don't work out, then over time my ability to refer people gets tarnished, right? Because then the recruiter's like, oh my God, Alexander just like is running around picking up random strangers and just dropping them into this employee referral program. So the hope is that you have somebody like me or somebody else get vetted, and then once you're vetted, it usually becomes a little bit easier. So hopefully that's helpful, Eric. I don't know if that was answered your question, but there's a couple things to think about. And I want to be mindful of people's time, because I know that people probably have to go eat dinner, or I have nothing to do. I'm just a sad working person.
I would say for sake of time, so we don't have any other current questions in the chat. So Alexander, do you have any last piece of advice, thoughts about branding?
Yeah, the only last thing I would say about branding is definitely get the, there's two things. One is definitely do your brand audit, which means look at all your public facing stuff, right? You want to Google yourself and see like what's out there. If you're arrested, you want to know if there was like something about you being arrested. Trust me, I've actually had that happen where we've Googled potential employees and we find out that they got arrested for like a brawl on campus or something stupid, right? So you definitely want to kind of Google yourself and see like what's out there about yourself. And I don't have time to kind of talk about like, how to make that go down further in your searches, but at least be aware of what's out there in the top 10 searches of yourself, right? Maybe it's old stuff. Maybe it's your old MySpace page from when you were like in elementary school, right? Whatever it is, you at least want to know what's out there that someone can find in the first 10 searches. That's the first thing. Second thing is as I said before, is to put together that board of directors for your brand, your personal brand, and have them kind of give you some good feedback. And hopefully they'll be mentors for you, right? Because they're going to have a vested interest in you being successful. So keep that in mind. Ask people for their honest opinion. Don't put your best friends in there. Don't put your parents in there, because unfortunately, a lot of times you're not going to get that really brutal honesty that you sometimes just need to help improve and to be better.
All right, so thank you, Alexander, for everything you shared today. If you guys have any further questions, feel free to reach out to Alexander. One last reminder to everybody on the call, please make sure you guys log into the My AKPsi community, where you can engage with other members in the collaboration groups and register for more upcoming events. So thank you all for attending, and we'll see you in the My AKPsi community.
Thanks, everybody. You guys all have a great evening.